Let's call the meeting to order. Roll call, please. Aye.
You get the power, you know?
Well, it went to my head.
Ms. Banks? Mr. Arnold?
I'm here.
Ms. Bell? Mr. Brown?
Present.
Ms. Carter? Here. Ms. Clark? Ms. Friedman?
Here.
Reverend Gordon?
Here.
Ms. Harding? Here. Ms. Mendoza-Locke? Here. Mr. Knowles? Mr. O'Connor?
Here.
Ms. Rodriguez? Here. Dr. Russell?
Here.
Mr. Stengel? Major White? Here. Miss White?
Thank you. Recognition of visitors. Richard, we'll start with you.
Just me? Okay, all right, I'm not sure, I'm sorry, yes, sorry. Melissa Medlin, Unison.
Michael Carter, board staff.
Elvick Sanchez, board staff.
Robert Kasperzak, board staff.
Faith Kelleher, board staff.
Jessica Smith is visitor.
Hi. Thank you. Welcome to all of you. Our first order of business is to consider the minutes of the March 7th Planning and Oversight Committee meeting. Anybody have any additions or corrections to those minutes? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve them.
So moved.
For a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Treasurer's report, Jenny.
Hey everyone, I'm going to direct you to page 5 for the financial statements for February. For the statement of revenue and expenditures. These are February, but I did want to let you know when we talk about the local levy revenue that we did receive our March allocation. We normally get it twice a year in our local levy revenue. And it was right around what I expected, a little bit higher. So in our local levy revenue line, at the end of fiscal year 23, I expect us to be very close to our budget. So because this is February, you don't see it reflected here, but we did receive that in March. In the federal revenue line, consistent with pretty much what I've been telling you for the last several months, we're under budget there because of SOAR from last federal fiscal year that ended in September. And this federal fiscal year, the 2.0 no cost extension and the 3.0 SOAR funds, and both of those are because they have gotten a late start. So we just haven't been able to pay the agencies yet and then draw the funds from OMAS and record the revenue on that. In the state revenue, again, consistent with what I've been saying for the last couple months, we're under budget there because of underspending in the multi-system adult funds and the ATP program. And both of those I expect to be underspent at year end. And then when we look down at the expenditures lines in the grant funded program expenses, that pretty much flows in line with the underspending in the revenue accounts. So when you see the underspending in the SOAR, you also see it in, when you see the underspending for SOAR in revenue, you also see it in underspending in the expenses. And the same with the multi-system adult. Then for February, we had a decrease in net assets of $522,000. I'm gonna shift backwards then in the packet to the balance sheet on page 4. February was a pretty light month for us as far as payments go. So we had just a decrease in cash of $696,000, just normal February payments. Plus you'll notice we did pay $220,000 to Task for their Warren Commons permanent supportive housing project, which was in the board designated funds. So you'll also see that down in the fund balances line, $220,000 decrease there. So that project has no capital designated funds remaining in the board designated funds. So just a recap of what's remaining then in the capital projects board designated. We have $2 million crisis, $467,000 left for St. Paul's, and $469,000 for Danny's Place. Then our non-designated board fund balance at the end of February decreased to right around $14 million. Payments for February are on pages 6 through 7, and there's a motion on page 3.
Are there any questions for Jenny? Everybody got it?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Charles, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious, what is you almost died today, Carl?
It's a card that we provide to safety forces that they provide the family or the victims of an overdose if they, when they go out on a call, and usually related to obviously a opioid or fentanyl overdose. And so it's a kind of like a wake-up call card with identification where they can go and get help. It's a leave behind.
Interesting, thank you.
All right, item number 6, Amy?
Hi everyone. I'm on page 8 in the packet. The resolution to 120-day notices. As you remember, in February, the board approved issuing 120-day notices with the intent to substantially change the base contract language to all providers, and then a select few providers received it regarding changes made to contracts for fiscal year 24 based on either performance and or spending projections from fiscal year 23. So as of today, 2 agencies have appealed, both related to the program side of things. There have not been any appeals related to the contract language. NPI received notice for their adult care facility program as well as for their peer recovery support program. They appealed, and board staff met with the NPI agency staff. During that appeal process, NPI provided updated financial figures showing an increase in spending trends based on some internal actions that they provided, which have resulted in improved or increased utilization of those beds in the adult care facilities. So they're currently housing more individuals than they were since the time of the 120-day notice back in February, which is what we ultimately want to see. We want to see them obviously housing more people, which they have shown that they are doing. So NPI reported efforts related to also increasing affiliation with ACF operators, which has helped to increase their utilization of the beds, as well as community outreach and new positions related to outreach efforts and quality assurance that have also contributed to their bed utilization uptick. So that's one program. The other program is their peer recovery support program, which is a similar scenario to the adult care facility program. They also appealed that, so we met with NPI staff to discuss it. That program has suffered some significant workforce challenges over the last few years. NPI shared with us some internal strategies that they have implemented to address this, and they are currently at full staff, full capacity for that program. They also have established a new relationship with Harbor and their Career Connections program as a way to recruit staff for that program, as well as some internal changes that they've adopted through a feedback process that they have internally to help support the staff in those programs. So 2 separate programs here, but ultimately the board staff issued a response to them that was pretty consistent with each of them. And that was to restore the funding back to the fiscal year 23 level, but not to give the 2% increase. So when they appealed, they asked for funding back at what they received for 23, plus they asked for the 2% increase. So our recommendations are to restore the funding, but not to provide the 2% increase, solely based on their history of underspending and their failure to meet outcomes for 23. Is why we did not agree with the 2% increase. So I can go on to Harper, or I can answer any questions related to that.
Just have one quick question. Do you know
I'm
if that's
sure I
probably
don't.
what the numbers were for the pre-restored?
For the ACF operator money?
For both programs, like in the amount of, you know, $1,774,920. What was it before this month? What is it? I guess what is it now before this?
We're restoring it to fiscal year 23 levels.
So same amount, so that's what it was last year, that's what it would.
Okay, and we didn't provide a separate number.
We, in the 120-day notice, we provided them a reduction in both of those programs.
Do we know what the reduction? I guess I want to.
We do, I don't have it with me right now.
I don't have it
We
with
can get
me either.
Okay, not a big deal. I just was curious.
I do have it on my desk, but I don't have it on mine.
Adult care facility reduction of 132,920. Peer recovery reduction of 36,824.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, so then I will do Harper's, or do
No,
you want
let's
to
do
do?
one
Oh,
at
do
a
it separately.
And
Okay.
just to confirm, the agency accepted our position on both of those?
They did,
Okay.
yes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Further questions? Okay, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Now let's go on to the next one.
Harbor's, okay, so that is, towards the bottom of page 8, is the Harbor update. So they also received a 120-day notice for their heroin opiate initiative program. They appealed it. We met with them as well to discuss that appeal. Harbor in their prevention programming, they've been underperforming in most of their board-funded prevention programs since the onset of the pandemic. They all have struggled in different ways, but some of those programs, they have been able to pull it through, so to speak. But the pandemic did have an impact on a few of the other programs as well. So while they've managed to pull it through on the other programs, it has required a lot of shifting of resources, sharing of staff within their prevention department. The sharing of the staff among those 4 prevention programs then caused hardships for all their programs. So they're kind of pulling one to the other to try to make ends meet, so to speak. So our recommendations at the 120-day notice was to eliminate that project, which Harbor agrees with. However, though, eliminating the one project would not resolve the issues that they had internally. So they had requested to utilize some of the funds from the Heroin Opiate Initiative to support the other programs to help them be more sustainable. So we worked together to determine how elements of the Heroin Opiate Initiative curriculum could be incorporated into those other prevention programs, and then what compensation would be needed to sustain those other programs. So to resolve this appeal, we agreed to eliminate the Heroin Opiate Initiative and then incorporate elements of the program's curriculum into those other existing board-funded prevention programs that Harbor provides. So to support those services, the board would need to provide an additional $39,900 to their community senior prevention program, $13,200 to the school and community prevention program, and then $9,900 to their FACES program. And those are the other remaining 3 prevention programs that I referenced. So those changes have been included in the fiscal year 24 purchasing plan proposed allocations. And then there is a motion indicating the total of those amounts on page 9. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Amy?
That's pretty good. Thanks for working to make that happen. And it still keeps part of the opioid
So it looks like roughly half of the 114 is going to be sprinkled among these other 3 programs, and then the rest just stays with the board.
Stay in class, yeah.
Yeah.
Will the staff change or will they be distributed also?
I'm sorry.
Will the staff, any staff lose positions or are they just rearranging?
Well, they weren't ever able to fill the position within the heroin opiate initiative, so there's not a position within that will be lost. And I don't think that there's been a negative impact on any other staff there.
In fact, they're able to use whatever resources were going into that, because they kept shifting, you know, to try and meet
Right.
all the little, trying to meet the bare minimums of the programs. So now they'll be able to consolidate those resources in those 3 programs. We've actually stabilized those programs. My opinion is it's a rather unique agreement, because, you know, we have a commitment to prevention. We don't want to lessen that commitment. And we are able to, you know, the heroin and opiate issues are still prevalent in our community, so we're able to integrate some of that into those other 3 programs with very modest investment in the other 3 projects. So I think it's a rather unique and pretty solid settlement.
And to the benefit of those programs by adding the extra curriculum.
And to us, because we save actually about $55,000.
And again, Harbor agrees with this approach.
Yes, they have.
Any other questions concerning the motion at the top of page 9? Entertain a motion.
So,
Second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
I have a few seconds here.
Sure.
Thank you. I just want to kind of cover what just happened. So for the new folks, because we want to make sure because we're not entirely done with the 120-day notice process. We do have one more appeal to hear, and we're working out those details. But, so in our contract, we give the 120-day notice, right? And then if they don't agree, they appeal. We were required to go meet with them, which we did. And then we will try and work out a settlement. If they agree, it ends up where we ended up today, right? If they did not agree, they have the ability to ask for a board-to-board meeting. You could have still went on with your motion and approved that if you so desired, but they would have then essentially asked for an appeal of the appeal, right? And then we would have, at our next meeting, we would have met with, at their request, with their board in an open meeting to discuss what was going on. At that point, the board staff would have not made a recommendation to you, because our recommendation was already documented. So then you would have been it would have been up to the board to come up with their own recommendation and work it out with whoever board is sitting across from you. I bring that up because I just want you, it's rare that we get to that level, but I wanted you to kind of understand the whole 120-day and appeal process as we kind of move forward in the next discussion, the next appeal, which won't be today.
Okay, that's helpful, thanks. Item number 7, the Unison Budget Adjustment Request. Jenny, I think this is yours?
It is on page 9 of the packet. If agencies request to change their budget by more than 10%, they have to submit in writing to us a request to change their budget. Unison did that by March 1st, consistent with the agency agreement. They submitted a budget revision request that was actually 2 parts. First, they wanted to combine their residential support program with their housing navigator and stability manager program in fiscal year 23. The second part of that request was that underspending for the combined programs be used for, be reallocated for renovations on Whitney Manor. Since this was actually not a budget revision for one program, but would actually be a combined program, and it's a change of programs, it actually had to come before you. So that's why we're bringing it before you rather than just doing a budget revision internally. So that's a little bit of background on this. First, we reviewed the two requests basically as two separate requests from Unison. Board staff reviewed internally, first to combine the programs in fiscal year '23. So if you might recall, in our 120-day notices back in February, we did issue one to Unison to excuse me, not renew the residential support program and to merge it with a housing navigator program in fiscal year '24. And then we were going to align the objectives for the two programs in fiscal year '24. In Unison's request, they wanted to essentially do that in fiscal year '23. They wanted to merge the two programs and and then align the two budgets together into one. And board staff are in support of this request, and then it would be a merged total of $404,587, which is simply one program combined with another program for fiscal year '23. And then they would have combined outcomes for the remainder of fiscal year '23. We think that this will allow and facilitate a good setup going into fiscal year '24 in what we would envision for fiscal year '24 in our 120-day notice process. For the second part of the request, which was the use of the $55,000 in underspending to be used for capital improvements of Whitney Manor, we had a lot of discussions around our priorities and if it aligned with our strategic plan, our equity and action plan, our community plan, our capital priorities. We also discussed how the request from Unison was to use underspending from residential support, which is a program that was not meeting their outcomes. And we are not, after we considered internally those different factors, we are not supporting, we would not support combining and using the underspending from fiscal year '23 for renovations of Whitney Manor. And there are several reasons listed in your packet for our not wanting to support that. The first being that the residential support program was not meeting their outcomes. Allowing a program that was not performing up to our standards to use underspending for a program that was not part of our financial forecast and not in alignment with any of our strategic plan and our current forecast programs doesn't align with our programs. The second bullet, though, is we did recognize that the program has value. And you can see there in October of 2022, our executive director actually identified $178,000 in undesignated OMAS capital funds that Ohio Moss has since designated for the project. And at that time, Unison did request an additional corresponding cash match, which we did not support because in June of 2022, we did provide Unison with $100,000 to address the rising cost of goods and services. You might recall we put out the additional funds for the agencies. And we did inform Unison at that time that they could use those funds for that purpose. And the last bullet that we have noted there is traditionally we would not support reallocation of underspent funds because our most recent financial forecast, I have underspending recapturing at 4%. And so by allowing the reuse of underspending, it could have negative financial implications for us. So we have two motions on the top of page 10. The first one would be to accept their request to combine the residential support and housing navigator and stability manager into one program in fiscal year '23. The second motion is to deny the request to reallocate $55,000 in fiscal year '23 underspending from the combined reallocation of programs for capital improvements to Whitney Manor.
Could you also review this?
Yeah,
So we know what
that's
we're,
next.
so that we know what we're voting on?
Yeah, before, I think, let's do it one at a time. But before we move to the separate sheet, which Scott's gonna talk about, let's just make sure, does anybody have any questions about the two motions that Jenny's gone over now?
Will they be passed as separate motions or one motion?
I think we could probably combine these two together, but this one will be separate.
Okay, thank you.
These are addressing the same topic?
But in a not really.
Not really.
In a different way.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
what just I wanted to make sure.
I want everybody to hear everything before we vote, but I want to stay, let's stay with what she did first, okay? So are there any other questions for Jenny? Yeah.
Yes, Jenny, just so that I can make sure I've kept this straight, we're gonna combine a program, and because of that, there's a $55,000 overage? Or is that the underspending?
Unison is anticipating $55,000, and if they were to combine the two programs in fiscal year '23, they are anticipating $55,000 in underspending.
Okay.
And they would like to use that underspending and reallocate it to renovations for Whitney Manor.
All right, so it wouldn't be to, got it, I'm with you now.
Sorry, I'm fighting a cold, I'm trying really hard to fight
No,
through
you're
it,
doing
I'm sorry.
great, you're doing great, you know, I just wanted to make sure that I understood where that underspending was coming from.
Yes, that's their anticipation for fiscal year '23, that's what they requested.
Okay, and so they want to reallocate that to do improvements to the house.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, any other questions for Jenny about the combination of the two programs and the recommendation to deny the reallocation of the $55,000 for Whitney Manor? All right, now, let's go on to the other part of this, so everybody will have a complete picture. And this is the separate sheet that should be at everybody's chair regarding the Whitney Manor Capital Project.
Okay, so we're not gonna vote on those two yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
I want everybody to have all
I
the information.
entirely agree. Okay, so, for the new folks here, you know I don't usually have walk-ons to the agenda. This is a very rare occasion that we allow this to occur. I think in the last 12 years, I think I've allowed 4. This is the 4th. But the timing of the discussion with the Unison proposal, plus yesterday we received word that Ohio Moss wants to move their capital project forward with Unison related to Whitney Manor, and in doing so would require us to have a resolution, passing a resolution that we support the project. I felt that we should just bring this to you all so that we have just the one discussion related to it all. So, in regards to Ohio Moss Community Capital Funding, this is a routine request for all Ohio Moss Community Capital, requires a board resolution supporting the use of those funds for the designated project with the intent that we do certain things. Those certain things are embedded in the contract between the board, the provider, and Ohio Moss. Those certain things are listed in this motion. Essentially, when we support an Ohio Moss Capital grant, we support the application that was submitted. We always vet that application first to see if it requires anything else, like a local match from us that we have not stated we would do or you have not previously approved. In this case, there is no local match requirement from us, although obviously you now have a request for one, right? Other thing that we always are requested to do is that we monitor the project for that it essentially does what it's stated it's gonna do in the application. You're gonna create 20 units of permanent supportive housing. That is what, for the next 30 years, that project needs to do. And at least once a year, we go out and we make sure that they have 20 units or somewhere about, and then we, if we find issues, we communicate that back to Ohio Mass. And if there is a default, for instance, 20 years in, the project is no longer viable, they sell the unit, that money gets returned to Ohio Mass and is placed in an escrow account. We then help Ohio Mass identify the next use of those funds for Lucas County. That's exactly what happened here. There was a capital project that sold some units, returned the money, and it was placed in an escrow account several years ago. That money remained there until we had a viable project that kind of fit this position, and then we communicate with the Ohio Mass that, hey, it's okay to use that money for this project. The value of that is it doesn't count against our two main priorities, which we've identified for this fiscal year 23 and 24 capital improvement, Ohio Mass Community Capital, which is the crisis services related to CPAS and the Danny's Place. So this doesn't impact those. The other thing is, while we're not recommending that we provide local match as stated by Jenny for the reasons that have already been stated, that doesn't mean that there's not a need for permanent supportive housing in our community. So why not support these funds being used for this process, even though we're saying we're not going to give you any local match for it. There's still value. Toledo Lucas County Homelessness Board agrees that permanent supportive housing is needed in our community, specifically around individuals with mental health. This is a great opportunity to support Unison in a way without impacting our financial forecast, and going back on some of the public policy decisions that we've made, in the past. So with that, I was comfortable bringing this to you all so that you could see the whole picture of what we're asking and recommending. And if you are approved, or if you so choose, I would need a motion to approve the motion as presented, which I can read it in, or you guys have it in front of you.
Okay, any questions for Scott about this aspect of the Unison Whitney Manor issue? What's the current use of Whitney Manor? Is it Silver Living?
No, I just believe that it is LMH supported housing.
No.
Okay.
You have questions?
No.
Oh, okay. Any other questions?
Do we have any concern or involvement one way or another with whether or not they can, Unison can match this money?
We don't have any involvement with that, nor I really don't have any concern with that as well.
Okay, all right.
I know that there is a significant amount of renovations that will exceed the available funds here, but my sense is they'll do like any other project. They phase in the renovations as they find the funds.
And we've already, as I understand it, made not directly a contribution to the project, but we've provided some funds that we have authorized previously.
Not local funds, so they cannot gain access to these funds without our resolution. So this would be our contribution, even though they're Ohio Mass Community Capital funds.
We basically found them some state money.
Are you talking about the 20 and 22?
Well, I was talking of, yeah, the 100,000 that
Yeah, which
Oh,
we also.
so we,
Yeah.
in fairness to that concept, we put that out there to everybody, to just address the rising costs of, you know, the environment we're operating
Right,
in.
services.
Everybody needed that amount plus more. We told them that they could use that money to match if they so desired. However, in fairness, just full disclosure, they had already used it for something else. So it wasn't like we were really giving them I mean, honestly, it wasn't like we were giving them something that, you know, that they hadn't already used. So
Right.
I'm just giving you the
Okay,
full
thank you.
picture.
Thank you.
So, to try to summarize this, I think we have three motions. We ought to take them each individually. One is a motion that would approve the merger of these two programs, which is essentially, would be revenue neutral to us except for the $55,000 in overspending. The second motion would be to refuse to allow Unison to use that underspending of $55,000 and let it come back to the board as part of the fiscal plan. And then the third one would be to provide the board support for the OMAS capital infusion of $178,000. Let's take them one at a time. Do I have a motion with respect to the merger of the programs?
I move that we accept the merger of the two projects.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. The second motion that's proposed by the staff is to deny Unison's request to allocate $55,000 in fiscal year '23, which is underspending from the merged programs in order to make capital improvements to Whitney Manor. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. And the third motion is on the separate sheet that the board approves the use of undesignated OMAS community capital funds for Unison's Whitney Manor capital project and agrees to support the project, monitor it, and et cetera, according to the requirements of OMAS. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. All right. Number 8. All right, it's not gonna get any easier. Pay attention. We now are gonna talk about fiscal '24 preliminary allocations by agency, and that's poor Jenny again.
I'm gonna try to go slower.
Okay, drink more water.
I'm gonna try to
Take
go
your time.
slower.
I asked her if she wanted me to do it. She said no.
No.
I don't want you to miss something.
Well, then there's that.
Let's make sure that's on the record.
Struggle through it, Jen.
So these are the write-up board starts on page 10. Pages 11, 12, and 13 are preliminary allocations for fiscal year '24, which would start on July 1st and run through June 30th of 2024. This is a long process that we go through at the board for our new board members. This is some background. For our new board members, we send out an application to our currently funded agencies. It's currently capped to our currently funded agencies that are OMAS certified. And they have to submit an application. And if they are meeting their outcomes and meeting their spending, they are eligible to request up to a 2% increase in their programs. They submit their applications. They were due back to us, I think, on February 24th. Board staff meet internally and review every application for every program. and review the budgets and review the outcomes that the agencies have submitted and determine if there's any changes we want, if we are comfortable with the 2% increase, and we do a little bit of back and forth on it. And this is a just preliminary numbers for you for what we would intend to fund going into fiscal year 24. It is just our agencies and the additional Ohio Moss allocations. It does not include the non-certified agency allocations that we would fund in fiscal year 24, and it does not include the pass-through allocations that we would have for 24. We will be bringing those to you likely in May, next month. So if you go to pages 11, 12, and 13, you can see it's just a listing of the agencies, the programs, what they are currently receiving in fiscal year 23, and then the proposed allocations for fiscal year 24. Then we also have a column there for any notes that might be of interest. If it was a program that we had a 120-day notice for, that is noted there. If it's a program that was partially or fully funded with SOAR 3.0, that is also noted there. If the agency did not request a 2% increase, we reached back out to them because it might have just been they put it in the request wrong, or, you know, it's a workbook in Excel. I mean, it's, in all honesty, there's room for error in how it's submitted. We're still working on some of that with the agencies, and did you mean to not request a 2% increase? Because you are eligible, you know, that kind of thing. So what we have in here is strictly what they put in the workbook, unless we have resolved it with them. I know, for example, like Zeph's POS in here, we have in here that they requested a decrease, but we actually, since I have this in here, have worked out with them that they actually had an error in the amount that they put in the workbook, and they're actually going to be probably at their fiscal year 23 allocation when you get the final numbers next month. So as I said, these are just preliminary allocations. There is no motion for you because it is information only for you to get eyes on it, ask any questions. Since there are some newer board members, if there are any questions about our process or the way we do it or our next steps, I am happy to answer them.
You did. Any questions for Jenny?
What does SOR stand for, Kristen?
State Opioid Response,
Okay.
which has actually changed names to State Opioid and Stimulant Response. So it goes by SOAR or SOS.
Okay.
There's a 2.0 year one, there's a 2.0 year two, there's a 2. So
We need to have a whole training session.
Maybe I shouldn't have asked that question.
You might not want to.
We get it confused as you do on that.
I have a question. I thought, Jenny, on page 12, the programs that are listed below that dark black line, I thought those would have been passed through, but you said the pass-throughs are not in here, so what are these?
Yes, so the pass-through, there's a distinction in what we get from Ohio Moss in pass-through or Ohio Moss funded. Pass-through means we don't get discretion on who the funds go to. So when we list the pass-through for you next month, it will specifically say the agency, because OMOS told us the agency and the amount. These are Ohio Moss allocations where Ohio Moss said, we're giving you this money for this purpose, but we get discretion on who it goes to. These we issued a 120-day notice to because we do not have the Ohio Moss allocations yet. So that's why you see all of those proposed allocations at 0. Because we don't have any of the allocations from Ohio Moss yet.
So when you get them, they'll just go away.
Or if we don't get them, we can eliminate them because we gave them a
Right.
120-day notice.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you'd have to backfill
Otherwise,
with
you have
local
to bring
funds
it back.
When do you anticipate getting it?
when the budget passes. So The budget.
Good luck.
Yeah, so it's a favorable behavioral health budget, let's start there. But the House is picking it apart right now. You know, obviously they're having their hearings. There is a lot of support for it as presented by the governor, but there will be major changes. Once they're done, it actually goes to the Senate, and the Senate has actually already started their hearings, and they're picking it apart. So when it's all said and done, you'll likely have the House will complete their work by mid-April. The Senate has to complete their work, I think by the 1st of June or somewhere around there. And then if there are differences, which there always are, then it goes to a reconciliation committee, which is made up of House and Senate leadership. That could take a couple of days, that could take a couple of hours, it really depends on what they're trying to stick into it. All that said, it has to be on the governor's desk by 11:59 on June 30th, signed by July 1. Now, that has happened most of the time. So there is a chance that we won't get our official notifications of what our cut is until August or September. And during the switch of a biennium, like it is, I mean, we're going from the current biennium to the next biennium, which is a 2-year budget. It's fairly routine that happens.
Any other questions of either Amy or Scott? Okay. Amy, health officers.
Oh. Page 14, we just have one renewal. So Ashley Kapanis, who is at Unison, or Sub Center, is up for renewal. So there is a motion in the middle of page 14 for that.
So
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstention, motion carries. All right, Jenny, back to you for AUD fiscal 23.
My last one. This is on page 14. In January of 2022, Ohio Mass awarded us $302,596.66 in federal grant funding to expand the use of the innovative approaches to treat persons with alcohol use misuse disorder, which is referred to as AUD. Funds could be used for individuals who don't have insurance, have limited insurance, or need financial assistance, obviously not paid with other sources of funds. At that time, we solicited applications from our provider network along with other Ohio Mass certified entities in Lucas County, and 2 programs were selected to be funded. New Concepts for $139,506 and Zeph Center for $163,090.66. And due to the amount of time that it took for Zeph Center to get their program up and running, because it was a new program, they could not spend their entire allocation in that time frame. We submitted a no-cost extension request with Ohio Mass, and it was approved in March of 2023. So all previously unspent funds were now have until March 14th of 2024 to be spent. Zeph anticipates they will have about $70,300 in spending through March of 2023, plus another $70,000 through March 14th of 2024, for a total of $140,321.27. That leaves $22,769.39 projected to be underspent of their allocation. We are proposing to reallocate those funds to New Concepts project to allow it to continue for approximately 2 more months so that the funds don't go unused. So there are two motions on page 15. The first one is to extend Zeph Center's agreement for a year from March 14th, 2023 to March 14th, 2024, and decrease the amount from $163.90.66 to $143.21.27. The next motion then essentially mimics that for New Concepts, extend the agreement for a year and increase the amount from $139.506 to $162.275.39. And if you are curious on their two projects, they are listed in the packet write-up from their original applications, New Concepts and Zeph, on page 14.
Any questions for Jenny about these motions? When would the 2 extra months, when would that occur? If this is extended through March of next year, is it in April and May of '24?
So the program actually just ended in March 14th of 2023. So for New Concepts, it makes sense for them to just pick it up now and just continue on. I mean, it's 2 months-ish, because in their program, the way it was designed is a little bit easier to pick up and run with it, which is why they were able to spend all of their funds the first year.
So the extension for them to March 20 of '24 is simply just to give them enough time to do whatever they're gonna
Yes.
do? Okay.
I would
We don't
anticipate-
expect them to keep going
Correct.
into it, okay.
Correct. I would anticipate their funds would be gone much before that, but.
Any other questions? Let's take these one at a time. The first one with respect to the Zeph extension and reduction in funding. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Any questions, further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? That motion carries. The next motion is to extend New Concepts for an equal period of time, increase their funding for this program for by about $22,000-23,000. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second? Any further discussion or questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Okay, thank you, Jenny. You are now able to
Thank you.
relax.
Thank you.
Scott, ARPA.
So I'm gonna have Jenny do this one.
You're such a card.
Okay, let's look at the bottom of page 15. You've heard me reference Toledo, City of Toledo ARPA funds here and there, but I've really not given you many particulars around that. And to be honest with you, it's been quite a bit of a moving target over the last several months. But just as a recap, you all know many of the jurisdictions here got American Rescue Plan Act funds. That's what ARPA stands for. The City of Toledo got approximately $181 million. In their plan, their high-level plan, they allocated $2 million to address behavioral health needs in the City of Toledo. Prior to doing that, they obviously called me up and said, hey, if we're gonna do this, will you guys help us administer the funds? And of course, for $2 million, we said, yes, we would be very interested in helping with that. They said, will you put a plan together? And so we, since the time frame that we started talking back, in probably early 22, we've been methodically working to develop a funding strategy. Integrating a lot of the things that we're hearing in the community, really impacted by the violence and death and traumas that our community is experiencing, but also hitting on some other timely topics, such as facilitating some additional growth in Latinx-based prevention mitigation services. So we're kind of hitting some high-level issues that have been swirling in our community for a while. Many of the ideas that have been put on paper are a combination of things that we've heard from the community that is needed, and with endorsement from and communication with the mayor's office and several city council members. So there's been a number of plans that we've developed and a number of different funding strategies, and we would meet and we'd say, this doesn't work, okay, let's do this. And so we finally come to a plan that we believe can get widespread support across city council. And we presented that plan to the mayor's office a couple of weeks ago. It's been presented, it's been moved to the law department to work up a resolution. And the hearing on this document will be in, I believe it's City Council Health Committee. Will be next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. I will be presenting this plan. I wanted to bring this to you before we do a public presentation so that you're aware of what's in the plan and you can speak to it. So I'm just gonna kind of go high level across, and full disclosure, there are some details that will have to be worked out, you know, as we get into it a little more. My thought was I don't want to spend a lot of time getting into the detail if city council isn't going to approve something, because then it's got to, you know, or it's got to get through committee, and then it's got to get through city council, and then we got to execute a contract. So there's a lot of changes that could occur, and I wanted to keep it as purposeful, but higher level than, you know, getting down to all the intricacies of a contract. So that's just kind of giving you a full disclosure of where we're at on that. The first item, which was probably the main priority for everyone involved, it was to get money in the hands of community groups that can do the most work with it. And that was, the idea was to build on our mini grant process. We have a very successful mini grant process. We do 2 mini grants per year, $5,000 per agency, 10 agencies a time frame, for a total of 20 agencies annually, $100,000 to us. The city of Toledo would like us to essentially increase that amount by 300%, where each agency would get $20,000. So we would have our 5 plus their 15,000, and each agency would get 20,000. We would essentially do the same process, but we would target items that support our mission, but also have the ancillary benefit of addressing violence in our community. So that would be the added effort that people would have to address in their response. We're confident we can run a cycle before the end of the year so that we can immediately get money out before the end of June, and then we would run 2 cycles each of the next 2 years for a total of 5 years for the amount that you see there. 5 cycles, thank you, 5 cycles. For a total, money has to be spent by December of, money must be obligated by December 31st, 2024, and then spent by September of 2025. Okay, so that's, meaning we're gonna have to tell people what they're gonna get and get them a contract, and then and that's for all these projects. So then the second project is something that we have been doing for a while and leaning on our relationships in the community. We want to formalize it a little more. So when there is a community tragedy, a shooting that has huge ripples through the community. Maybe it's a multiple event. Maybe it's something that happens at one of the schools or one of the housing complex or whatever. We inevitably get a call. Let me rephrase that. Amy gets a call to provide some level of support in the community. Maybe we go out there and we help develop connections into behavioral health services, provide some trauma and grief support. But we end up being there for sometimes a day, sometimes a week. We lean on our partners to help us. We'd like to formalize that process a little more and be able to pay clinicians that are responding to do that work. Right now, they're essentially doing it for free, or the agency says go ahead and go at a loss of revenue to the agency. So we want to kind of formalize this a little bit and create a wellness and response team. It's a modest amount of money. Honestly, we hope we never have to use this money, but it's unlikely given the amount of times we get requested to go do something. There are other communities, other groups that are doing some similar works. There's some similar teams that do a response. We would consider how to integrate them into the conversation. So if anybody's listening at home thinking, hey, we already do that, yeah, we want you at the table. We've left it wide open so that either we can run it or our preference would be an agency to run it. A lot of times Zeph gets those calls because they run the emergency services. So, we look at it then, maybe it's the CISM team, which don't ask me what that stands for. Robert, do you know what CISM stands for?
Critical Incident Support.
Stress.
There you go. The important piece is we want to be able to respond in a relatively quick amount of time by activating a team and getting into the community where it's needed. On the heels of that, we are seeing, and there is an evolving conversation in the communities where primarily mothers who have been their families have been victimized by violence and often lost a loved one due to gun violence, are starting to form support and grief groups. We want to support that. So that's what that next line is. And we know of at least one group that does it right now. We think there's several others that are evolving, but we want to put some wraparound support for them to give them the ability to do that work. We're not trying to make them clinicians, but we're trying to help them understand how the system works, provide them some additional training, whatever they might need to get that work done. Again, in the community, not us, in the community. I should have mentioned as well as all of these projects, all this funding has to be related to impacting the harm done by the COVID pandemic. So they're all connected to the outcomes related to the pandemic. We've seen a tremendous uptick in the amount of domestic violence during the pandemic and beyond. The Toledo City, the mayor's office and others, including us, wanted to see an increased investment in providing access to treatment services for both victims and perpetrators using some of these ARPA funds. And the Family and Child Abuse Prevention Center was identified as the entity to do that work. We currently fund them to do counseling work. They're well positioned to do that work. And we are confident that they would do very well in providing those services. The next is obviously one of our priorities, but also connecting into priorities of the mayor's office and city council as well, is to get some services moving for the Latinx-based prevention navigation services. So we have been working since the disruption of services back in February, January of '22, maybe earlier, to reinstall those services. We know that there's going to be a tremendous amount of startup costs related to that. There's also some preparations that the organizations that we are currently working with need to undertake. And there is at least one organization doing some of the work right now that we would like to add into this conversation. So there is a breakdown of those planned services on the bottom of page 17. We have been working with the Believe Center and Sofia Quintero to create a plan for reestablishing Latinx-based services around prevention and navigation in those areas. However, Nuestra Gente also is able to provide navigation services. They are currently certified by Ohio MAS to provide support services. We want to, since they are literally the only organization right now reaching that population strategically, we want to engage them in this conversation. We need to start services. So let's get that done. And then all of these funds could be added to all of our funds that we've identified. Or maybe it's some of those funds, or maybe it's most of those funds. It's one of the things we don't have worked out yet because I don't have budgets. But it opens up the door for a greater response and to meet some of the needs of these emerging organizations, like, you know, do they need increased space? Will they need equipment? Will they need software? Will they need a car? Will they need a van? Will they need? We're literally building a lot of these things from the ground up. So it's a great opportunity to collaborate in funding, and also using the ARPA funds to help mentor these organizations for how we do business in case at the end we want to convert some of these to board-funded initiatives. So that was the thinking, and then of course I'm not writing any grant that we're going to do a bunch of work on that doesn't allow us to fund Danny's Place construction. So we threw $330,000 into the Danny's Place pool that very likely could be the last major donation into that amount, and would bring us somewhere, if we are lucky enough to receive it, probably about $9.6 million of the $10 million goal. So that is the plan. That is the way we'll be presenting it. Thank you for allowing me to test my presentation on you all. I'm sure you have some questions, some of which I may or may not be able to answer, but I will do my best. So that's where we're at.
I think this whole project is really great. The only problem I have with it is that it's going to end. And I would hope that there's something to be put in place to make sure that at least some of these ideas are continued, because the need will continue to be there.
So we know Danny's Place will continue, right?
Sure.
Certainly we have a plan for the Latinx services. We will get the opportunity to look at the rapid response team and see if that's needed and what level is needed, right? And we do the mini grant, but the 20 grand is just not sustainable for us. And who knows what the future holds? Maybe we'll decide we love them all, and we wanna wrap them all into whatever new levy campaign we wanna deal with. But we struggle with that concept all the time, is, you know, you just heard the AUD discussion. The difference is you go into it knowing that you're gonna have these funds for a little bit, minimal amount of time. Where can they do the best work? And you take advantage of the situation that you have in front of you, and then, you know, if we're lucky enough to continue them, then that's great. If not, we learn from them, and we have decisions to make then on if those rise to a higher priority than some of the things that we're funding. So without that, we don't have that opportunity.
I appreciate how thoughtful and community-centered all of it is. And is there a benefit, I know we have a meeting, don't we, at 4 o'clock next Tuesday here. Is there a benefit to any of us being there?
We do not have a meeting here next Tuesday.
Oh, okay.
Because
Of that.
I have that. But we will need to talk about why we need an executive and nominating committee meeting, because we need to actually do nominations.
Yeah.
And I'll wait for Senna and Pastor Gordon to have that. Yes, we are calling for all supporters to show up and lend their voice for supporting us. We are starting to communicate that ask. Actually, I started this afternoon.
So you would like us to attend the 4 o'clock next
If-
Tuesday at City Council?
If you would, if you would.
Absolutely. We're there.
Richard will show us the way, yeah.
And the agenda, the calendar that was printed last Friday, it's not on here.
Indeed it isn't.
It's amazing.
So it
We're gonna
last
add it
minute.
on there.
It is.
It's an add-on.
Yeah, matter of fact, I'm gonna get the call sometime within the next day or so to confirm.
Well, you're gonna be following the agenda review, which can
Exactly.
easily go 3 hours, and to be honest, they're sometimes not in a very good mood after agenda review.
I was told it was gonna get put on past the agenda.
Okay.
Because it's not imperative that you all be there, but, you know, lending your voice is definitely, you'll have an opportunity beyond next week, because my sense is, it's the Health and Human Services Committee, or the Health Committee, which is led by Teresa Gaddis, Councilwoman Gaddis. She's supportive of this plan. I've talked to her, met with her more than once on it. And then it would have to go to full council after that, so there'll be a few opportunities.
So this is the 10th or the 11th?
It is the, yeah,
11th
the
at
11th.
4 o'clock, City Council.
I can send you information on it.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
So, love the plan. We already have relationships with Sophia Quintero and the Believe Center. Have you been in contact with North Transit about this possibility?
Well, I sent him an email this afternoon saying, hey, by the way, we're talking about it.
I'm sure they're,
Yeah.
yeah, they'll be very happy
So,
about it.
so, yeah, you know, it's a delicate balance of what public conversations you actually have in front of the mayor's office or in front of the city council. And we're trying to be cognizant and not get too far out in front of our skis, so to speak, right? But I did send, for the named organizations, Child Abuse, Family and Child Abuse Prevention Center, forgive me because I always say that wrong, Nuestra Gente, Sophia Quintero, and the Believe Center, a note just saying, hey, just so you know, I'll be talking about this today. The document did go out last Friday to the public, so if they're reading our packets, they saw it. But as we know, we can't always rely on folks to look at that. There's a lot going on, so. Okay?
David?
I think these are marvelous programs, and so much so that I'm wondering, since it's Toledo monies, and how do you address somebody coming from outside the city that wants to take advantage of one of these wonderful opportunities?
You know, I'm gonna say, serve them, right?
Okay, sure.
You know,
Especially
there's,
since we're a Lucas County
agreed.
entity.
So where, you know, I think it's where the service is being performed as opposed to
To whom?
to whom.
Gotcha.
And let's be honest, I mean, if we have to activate the team in a, you know, outside of the city, we're gonna do that. We're gonna figure out how to get that done. Amy does this all the time. And so does Zeph. And others. It's just not Zeph. It's Unison, Harbor. They all lend their voice to serve folks.
I have a question about the community grants. I've always been very supportive of the mini grants. I think they're a great nudge and helpful. But they're also, $5,000 is not a lot of money. And it's not a lot of fiduciary duty on our part. And if it doesn't work out, we'll move on to the next one. $20,000 is qualitatively different, I think, as well as quantitatively different. And you've already addressed one of my concerns, which is sustainability. We don't want people going out and hiring people they're gonna have to get rid of 6 months from now, because that screws up the whole system, and we've got enough turnover. But what about the burden on our staff to monitor these, to see, because when we give somebody $20,000, we're gonna wanna know what the outcomes were.
How are you gonna measure it?
So we almost, I wouldn't say almost, we always have a contract that has certain deliverables. The idea behind the mini grants was to keep it as simple as possible. And I've reiterated that time and again with folks that I've been talking to at the mayor's office and city council. We don't want to overburden this process with bureaucracy. We want to keep it simple. So, that said, 20 grand is a lot of money.
Well, yeah, the public's gonna wanna know if
So-
we're being good stewards of our money.
So we always, even with 5,000, they have to tell us how they spent their money.
That's right.
And they have to tell us what they did to, you know, with that money.
How they address the problem.
How they address the problem. So their application, while it's a simple application, they'll say, this is what we're planning to do with the money. We have some parameters around that, you know. One of them, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of them is we usually don't wanna just bring in a speaker, right? We don't wanna be, you know, we don't wanna be the sole funder for a singular event. We know that that's gonna have very limited impact. What we wanna really do is build on the good work that they're already doing. So maybe there's a group that if they had a little bit more money, could serve a few more kids. And so we wanna count those kids and we wanna look at, okay, what did they get? And, you know, we're not gonna do a scientific survey or a study on, or an evaluation on what the impact of it is. But, you know, there's groups out there that are doing the work, that are very supportive of our mission, that this money would really mean. $20,000 to a smaller organization
No,
means
I
a
agree.
whole lot more.
I understand
Yeah.
that. I think we need to be prepared to have accountability for future
So-
levies, for our
So-
community accountability.
So the one thing we don't know yet is what will be our reporting requirements to the
City.
the city, thank you. While I say that, I've kind of let them know, hey, I really don't want to get into a bunch of administrative burden. I mean, we're gonna have some of that locally, that's what we do. We never take a cut of these funds. We never take a cut of any funds that come through us, even though we probably could. We want these monies to get passed into the community, so that's why, like the mini grant, I tried to just build it into something we already do. Danny's Place, we already do that. Family and Child Abuse Prevention Center, I said it right that time. We're already doing that, so we're trying to minimize it that way. Accountability, your statement is well taken. We haven't had that conversation internally yet, but we certainly will, because Dr. Carter over there is in charge of that program, and we'll be asking him.
To come up with standards.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Good.
Scott, do you
Sorry, sir.
do you expect much opposition from council?
I would hope not. We've done,
And if so, where would that come from?
I wouldn't want to speculate on that. I think that we've done quite a bit of work on really truly meeting the needs of the community as best we could. There's been, many of these ideas we might have walked in the door with, but we didn't have them develop. And so several of the council members put their 2 cents in, the mayor's office put their cents in. The rooms that we were sitting in, with the around violence reduction, ideas came from that room, and, so
So they've already had some.
they've had a lot of involvement in the conversation. This will be the first time I've actually been able to present to them fully what the plan is. And according to what I've been told, this is much more detailed than anything else that they've seen coming through. So, because we know we're gonna have to implement it.
Well, that's right, and that's why I'm, worried about the burden on our staff and figuring out ways to achieve accountability without taking them away from other important tasks. So, enough said. Any other questions for Scott? All right, thank you. I think these are terrific ideas, and Godspeed. All right, that's it. Open session. Richard.
Not much going on at Government Center this morning. County Commissioners was well attended because April is National Second Chance Month. So just about the entire Reentry Coalition was there. They told a few stories, they had a few laughs, they had their pictures taken, and then they went to the next item on the agenda, which is April is County Government Month, and the room emptied out like it was a bomb threat. Everybody went out to the hall. And Pete Gerken just couldn't help but comment that there's nobody here to listen to all the things that the county commissioners do. The theme this year is Counties Rise, and RISE stands for Resiliency, Inclusion, Solvency, and Empowerment, whatever that's supposed to be. But then they're talking about the county is pretty much ignored, and it is a mystery to me why they haven't hooked up for their live stream. I mean, they got the wires strung. The last time I asked, they said supply chain issues, but they haven't gone to live stream their meetings yet. Yesterday at a safety committee of city council, I testified for a second time about the need for a policy for the phenomenon known as suicide by cop. Now, I testified back in January the 23rd at another meeting. 2 days later, they had another one, a 47-year-old man. Wife called 911, he's acting erratic. When they got there, he's holding a shotgun. They told him 25 times, put it down. He would not. He aimed it at them, and they shot him to death. And I quoted from Chief Kroll about all these in the past. The city does not have a policy that deals with what do you do with an individual who is telling police officers, I want you to kill me. This problem is made even more urgent by the fact that tasers work approximately 60% of the time. That's another thing that Chief Kroll would say in his press conference. And they just spent another $350,000 on tasers. So I've been trying to get them to do something about this. The city needs a policy to deal with suicide by cop because we know we're going to have more of these in the future. Other cities across the country are facing very large lawsuits because of people that have been shot or wounded by their local police department. And I did want to I read a lot of newspapers and I'm really disturbed by what I'm reading. When they report on these mass shootings, it all depends upon what spin they would have put on it. They don't always pay attention to the families. Some of them they do. They say, yeah, the family tried this, that, and that, get help. Others they don't, only unless they want to blame it on the family members. The Oxford shooter in Michigan, he was 15 years old. His family's being charged with involuntary manslaughter. The Highland Park, Illinois, the guy that shot up a parade, he's 21. His father is being charged with reckless conduct. That's a departure because in the past, there have been attempts to charge families with various firearms offenses. But from state to state, that varies. In some states, it's serious, some states not. This is taking it to a new level, and what concerns me most is the news media. It seems like the only time they want to mention the families is if they're trying to blame all of this on the families, and they're saying these trials are going to set legal precedents, and in the future you'll see more and more families charged, and it's just a tiny percentage of families that neglect to lock up their firearms. So I think what you might see in the future is less and less sympathy for family members and much more anger towards that very small percentage that leave a firearm out for a child or an adult with mental illness to get a hold of. Thank you.
Richard, are you aware of any city that has a well-drafted policy on suicide by cop, something that could be used as a model?
Detroit is learning the hard way. They are facing two $50 million lawsuits, and they're currently looking at new policies and new non-lethal methods. They're looking at the bolo wrap, which it looks like something out of a Roadrunner cartoon, but it's a bolo, like the gaucho stuff. Other cities are looking at it. Toledo is not, and Chief Kroll, before he retired, was saying this in his press conferences. He needs a policy because our officers have to make a split-second decision. When a guy's holding a gun saying, "I want you to shoot me," do you shoot him? Or do you take the chance that maybe you can talk him into putting the gun down? I don't know of any city that's got it right, but Detroit's looking at it.
There's got to be some policy group somewhere who could prepare draft, like sample policies that would be useful. That's
If I can find one, I'll make sure City Council gets a copy.
Yeah. that'd be
Well,
good.
and let's remember that, Chief Trundle just got appointed a few days ago, and we need to give him an opportunity to warm his chair up. But I think he's very aware of some of the issues that are going on there too. We've had multiple conversations with him over the years. So I'm confident that he is not blind to the need to have a better developed and more robust engagement strategies with individuals that we come in contact with.
Any other comments? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Trust